Hi-Fi Rush is one of the best games I've played in recent memory, just pure style and fun. The gameplay merges action and rhythm mechanics together perfectly, but it turns out I'm way better at the action than I am at the rhythm. It got me thinking, hey, I haven't explored the hack and slash genre much, maybe I should check out some other games. I've heard good things about most of the Devil May Cry games, I'll give those a shot. So as I was pondering which to play first, do I play 1 because it's where the series began, 3 because I've heard it's the best, 5 because it's the most modern? Then I remembered, oh yeah, what was that one about? So around 2010, Capcom looked at Devil May Cry 4 and wasn't too impressed with its sales. Despite it being the best-selling game in the series, they felt that if they wanted better sales, they'd have to shift the series in another direction. Time for a game with broader appeal. Time for a game aimed at Western audiences. Time for a reboot. That word will strike fear into the heart of any fan of, well, anything, and for good reason too. More often than not, reboots completely misunderstand what made the originals great. Lots of them take on a new identity, hardly even resembling the franchise they were based on. Though rarely, some reboots are great, and some even surpass their source material. So Capcom sent some of their staff over to Ninja Theory, a team who formerly worked on Heavenly Sword. Now that game had some pretty mixed reception, so fans of Devil May Cry were skeptical of this new studio. But later down the line they went on to make Hellblade, which I've heard is great. In 2013, DmC Devil May Cry released to the world, the internet explodes, fans of Devil May Cry are outraged, and a few years later Capcom swept it under the rug and went back to the original universe. Despite its good reviews from critics, it wasn't exactly the hit they were hoping for. But hey, I'm not a fan of Devil May Cry. My knowledge of the series starts with memes and ends at Marvel 3, so I won't have any expectations going into this game. I thought I'd give it a shot and see if the game is actually bad or if it just shouldn't have had its name attached to the series. Also, just to clear up some confusion, I'll be referring to the original series as Devil May Cry and the reboot as DmC. Got that? Great. Also spoilers if you care. DmC follows Dante, a young hedonistic man who's laying low and killing demons. The story begins with a mysterious girl named Kat contacting him and a hunter dragging him into Limbo. DmC is set across 2 planes, the real world and the demon world, Limbo. Kat is a medium who can talk to us between these planes. The real world is mostly used for cutscenes and exploration segments, and Limbo is where you'll be doing the fighting. Dante's moveset starts out pretty small, but you quickly unlock more moves and weapons, starting with his pistols. The cancel system makes attacking and dodging feel snappy and responsive, and the varied move list makes coming up with your own combos fun. It's a lot of fun trying to figure out new ways to use my moves, like realizing I can use Reverse Rainstorm after a launcher as a substitute for jumping. After killing the hunter, you meet up with Kat in the real world and she takes you to meet Virgil, leader of the Order, an organization rebelling against Mundus, a demon who's been controlling humanity through media manipulation and propaganda. Now, I want to get this out of the way early, because it's the biggest talking point about the reboot. All the returning characters from Devil May Cry got completely redesigned and rewritten. They must have thought these redesigns would be a real slam dunk too, because they put DmC Dante in PlayStation All-Stars Battle Royale, before DmC was even out yet. This was a real bad move, because not only did that game suck, but fans hated the new Dante, and the writing as a whole. The term character assassination gets thrown around a lot when discussing this game, so I gather that most of the hate was because these characters are very different to their Devil May Cry counterparts. But different does not always mean bad, so can these characters stand in their own right? Not really. I'm pretty mixed on these characters. I think Dante being a cocky asshole could have worked better if he had more humanizing character moments, but as it stands he just comes across as annoying and juvenile for the whole game, like a teenager trying way too hard to act cool. Virgil wasn't that interesting, just a cold and logical character. He works well as the antithesis to Dante, but that's all he really has going for him. And Mundus was boring as hell, no different to any other run-of-the-mill evil overlord antagonist. The only characters I was interested in were Kat and Phineas, who ironically aren't from Devil May Cry. They both have implied backstories that I would have liked to learn more about. They do explain Kat's backstory a bit, but not in much detail, and Phineas is in like 2 levels and then disappears for the rest of the game. I do like how the characters look though, it fits the contemporary kind of punk aesthetic they were going for. Oh my god. No, you can't give a character a katana and a fedora. How do you expect me to take him seriously? What's next, am I going to see him on the light rail? But I can put up with bad characters, good gameplay can more than make up for it. And honestly, I'd say it does. In the second level you unlock the demon weapon Arbiter and the angel weapon Osiris. I like how you use these angel and demon weapons. You either hold left trigger for angel mode or right trigger for demon mode. Holding these buttons essentially swaps out your moveset on the fly. Each weapon doesn't have too many unique moves, but you've always got quick access to other weapons, so my moveset never felt sparse or limiting. You even get an angelic and demonic grappling hook, one that pulls enemies to you and one that pulls you to them. Each weapon has its own uses, some are good for single target damage, some are good for crowd control, some are good for combos. The only weapon I didn't find myself using much was Ebony and Ivory, the pistols. You can weave them into combos pretty easily, but they do so little damage that it always felt like a waste of time, and I disregarded them entirely the moment I got the shotgun. You unlock more weapons as the game goes on, and it binds switching them to the D-pad. Once again, having these on such quick access is great. Switching them out mid-combo is kinda tricky, but it's much nicer than having to open a menu just to change weapons. The way you unlock them feels kinda random though. Arbiter and Osiris made sense, you get them from portraits of your demon father and angel mother. But later it's just like, you killed the succubus, cool, here's some Hulk hands. Did he just figure out how to do that or something? Same as when you kill the Anchorman, he dies and Dante is like, check this shit, and just has glaives now. It kinda looks like you absorb something from him, but Bob Barbas was a demon, why do you get an angel weapon from him? I don't know why I'm so hung up on this, it's really just an excuse to give the player some more tools throughout the game. The combo system is great, being able to switch out your weapons so fast makes coming up with combos utilizing a bunch of them both simple and fun. Every weapon shares inputs for their moves, double tap forward Y, hold Y, YX2, pause YX3, etc. So you don't have to stress about remembering a bunch of different button combinations, you just have to remember what moves are assigned to these inputs. They do encourage you to switch up your moves though. Some enemies have unique interactions that make certain weapons better for dealing with them, such as Arbiter being able to break through shields, and Eryx being able to uppercut tyrants out of their hyper armor.
Like acrobats, that's why that'll crack a back.
Though the game does occasionally throw out enemies that can only be damaged by angelic or demonic weapons, which sucks. It doesn't encourage a certain playstyle, it forces it. The game basically says, hey, enjoying that fun and varied moveset? Well, too bad. They did rectify this in the Definitive Edition, though. You can hit them with any weapon, but you do less damage and don't stagger them. The Definitive Edition actually fixes a lot of issues. It adds a lock-on, which would have been very helpful for bosses, and it gets rid of Virgil's stupid hat. Unfortunately, Definitive Edition only released on PS4 and Xbox One, no PC port, so I'm stuck with the inferior version. I looked through the change list and every change they made seems great. Rebalanced weapons, extra modes, reworked enemies and bosses. Hell, they even took a few popular community mods and implemented them into the base game. It also rebalances the style system, which is great. As it stands in the original, the style meter felt a bit undercooked. Doing these elaborate combos with different weapons never felt like it was giving that many more points than hitting Y a few times with the axe was. Devil Trigger is a bit of a mixed bag too. The visuals are great, the way it washes out all the color except for red looks sweet, and the sound effects make your attacks really feel like they're hitting harder. But the way it pops up enemies when you activate it is kind of annoying. It feels like a bit of a get-out-of-jail-free card for when you're being overwhelmed. And while in theory it would make enemies easier to combo, I found it more hindering than anything since the lack of gravity made my normal combos drop. Activating it felt really hard too, you have to click both the sticks in, but it wasn't very responsive. I'd always end up recentering the camera a few times before getting it to work. Apparently this is due to having V-Sync off. Turning it on makes moves that require two buttons to be pressed much less precise, but I didn't know about this until after beating the game. The story isn't anything to write home about, it's not the worst plot I've ever seen, but it's by no means good. Mundus is ruling over humanity and also killed your parents. Dante, Virgil, and Cat team up to try and take him down, first by destroying the energy drink company the demons are poisoning to keep humanity under their influence, then by taking out a demonic news presenter spreading propaganda. You meet Phineas who's like, "Aw man, I lost my eye. Here dude, I got your eye. Ah, sweet. Here's how you use Devil Trigger." You kill Bob, but then Mundus finds your hideout and raids it. Oh no. Dante is stuck in limbo while Cat is in the real world, so you can't protect her from the feds.
We don't have much time. Get down on your knees. Put your hands up. Do not fight back.
Yeah, because that worked out well for the Lost Guys. Cat gets kidnapped and Mundus offers us a trade. Virgil gives him Dante and he gives back Cat. Virgil is totally chill with letting Cat die, but Dante is like, "Nuh-uh, we gotta save her," which you do by kidnapping Lilith, who is pregnant with Mundus' child. You fight her and then offer Mundus a deal. Mundus gives us Cat, we give him Lilith. Lilith's child? Mundus doesn't really care about her, only that she carries his heir. So yeah, the deal goes well until Virgil shoots the pregnant woman. We're the good guys. This makes Mundus a little mad. All that's left is to go up to his tower and kill him. Once you get up there, you need to close his hell portal to weaken him. Doing this makes Limbo and the real world merge together for some reason. And Mundus starts throwing hands with Dante.
To them, they probably thought I was just moving out of the way, but I was actually setting up to where their blind spot was.
Mundus turns into some big dude and you kill him. We did it, Virgil. We saved the city.
The path is clear for us to rule.
Virgil betrayed us. Who could have seen this coming? You beat him and he just leaves? He doesn't die or anything, he just pisses off. I guess we're not going to question that demons are real now? You know, millions are probably dying. So yeah, it has some interesting themes about the lies of the modern world, but it doesn't explore them in any real depth, and it just comes off as kind of pretentious. Limbo being a true reflection of the world is a pretty cool idea, but they don't do much with it. If you want something that uses this concept, watch They Live. I was going to criticize the game for having none of the characters react to the fact that Mundus probably just killed thousands of people, and that Cat just conveniently knows the layout of Mundus's tower somehow, but they actually added a cutscene in Definitive Edition that explains it. The cutscene cinematography is pretty good. They use a lot of camera shake to emulate handheld shots, which helps immerse the player. I think the lens flare is a bit over the top sometimes, but a lot of games were doing that back then. I did have some problems transitioning from gameplay to cutscene and vice versa. I looked up a few long plays and didn't see anyone else having this problem, so I'm not really sure what caused it for me. The art direction is nice too. I was a bit worried early on that every level would just be hellish red areas, but they switch it up pretty often. From haunted carnivals to upside down cities to whatever the hell was going on in the nightclub mission. I also love that shot where you have to play out a battle from the perspective of a news helicopter. It's really cool. Same goes for those shots where they put a blackboard effect over the level. And while I'm on about the art direction, the music in this game is great. It has a big electronic and metal influence, which complements the gameplay perfectly. The level designs are basically just combat sections broken up by some basic platforming. The game usually gives you a few hazards in the combat areas, which is always fun, giving the player something to avoid but also throw enemies into. The platforming is more tedious than fun though, at least it doesn't punish you much for failing, just a little damage. The game isn't that challenging overall, though note that I did play on normal, but I only died once. And it was in a platforming segment. You can buy healing items if you ever need them, but I always felt like I could find enough throughout the levels that I would comfortably have a few at all times, and I only think I ever needed them like twice, so I just dumped all my red orbs into health upgrades. The bosses are actually a bit of a low point. None of them are particularly memorable or interesting. I can't tell if this dodge has way too many iframes or if the bosses have some really bad hitboxes. Mundus is especially bad. Half the fight is platforming and the other half is waiting around for him to attack so you can hit him back. I was actually happy when Virgil betrayed me because Mundus would have been very underwhelming as a final boss. A problem with this game is that it never shows you Virgil's power. I don't feel threatened when he betrays me because we never see him beat someone in a fight. He helps you against Mundus, but he gets his ass kicked halfway through. My only reason to be scared is if he pulls out sword loops or hits me with Dark Angel. I was pretty excited to fight Virgil because I love same-size boss fights, and thematically the idea of fighting your opposite is awesome.
I already had a full 5-stage plan ready to take everyone out.
But Virgil was pretty underwhelming too. It's actually really easy until he pulls out his shadow clone near the end. You can launch him for combos, but he breaks out pretty fast, and at low health he goes for this healing phase where you have to use Devil Trigger to kill him. The game does hint at this by making the clone drop purple orbs, but it's a bit annoying. I get that they wanted you in Devil Trigger for the final scene, but they could have just had that happen in the cutscene. It's at best annoying and at worst confusing, just a boring way to end the fight overall. DmC will probably always be remembered as that weird, shitty reboot, but I enjoyed this game. Sure, it could do with a better story, characters, balancing, but I can't really complain when I'm actually playing it. I enjoyed the gameplay so much that I'm willing to look past all the flaws with the writing and appreciate it for what it is. Fun. I can't help but imagine that if this wasn't tied to the Devil May Cry series and was just an innocuous hack-and-slash game made by Ninja Theory, that it would have been loved by a lot of people. A cult classic that would be looked back on fondly by those who played it. Hell, maybe it would have gotten a few sequels and become its own series. I could definitely see the writing improving with more games if they listened to player feedback. It will probably never live down its reputation, but it doesn't have to. What matters is that 10 years later, people can still find value in this strange piece of gaming history, and hopefully have a lot of fun doing it. I mean, hey, it even convinced me to check out the other games. But until I play those, I can say with certainty that DmC Devil May Cry is my second favorite hack-and-slash game. Hey, it's been a month since I finished writing the script for this video, and in between editing I played the other Devil May Cry games. So before the video ends, I thought I'd give some brief thoughts on them, just to wrap things up, going off my personal ranking of the games. DmC 2. Okay, DmC 2 bad. Nothing new here. The levels are bland, the style meter sucks, the enemies are terrible, the plot is basically non-existent, and the game is just really boring. Sometimes I couldn't tell if the enemy AI had broken or if the boss just had one attack. Devil Trigger is horrendously overpowered, just look at this. I'm not doing any special strat here or anything, I just pop Devil Trigger and start mashing Y. The damage is just that high. This is a late game boss. Margin Form is even more busted, just look at the damage on this, and the game doesn't even tell you how to use it. I thought, oh, maybe it's just Dante and Lucia would be better, and while her general moveset is definitely a step up, it's still DmC 2. At least the final boss was cool, but it wasn't worth playing through this. If you want to check it out, it comes with the HD collection, so it's a pretty harmless venture, but there really is no shame in skipping this one, it's just not worth your time. DmC 1. It's an awesome start for the series, but that's all I can really say. The camera sucks, the combat feels limited, the only thing I can honestly praise in modern day is the atmosphere. I still had fun with the game, but I don't think I'll revisit it anytime soon. Also, what the hell, his name is pronounced Mundus?
Mundus.
Why did the reboot change that?
Access to Mundus's unborn.
What? DmC 4. The first half of the game is pretty dang good. Nero's moveset is a fun change of pace, this grapple arm really helps keep combos going, and Buster adds a lot of new ways to interact with enemies. The story is kinda weak, but yeah, whatever, the gameplay rules. But it slows down in the second half. You switch to Dante, and his moveset is rad, style switching is a much needed addition, and having 3 devil arms and 3 guns keeps his moveset nice and complex. In fact, Pandora might be my favorite weapon in the series. The problem is that his levels are just Nero's levels but backwards, so not only am I backtracking through levels I've already played, but between Nero, Dante, and the boss rush, you have to fight some bosses 3 times. Some of the enemies just don't feel good to fight as Dante either. They almost feel designed for Charge Shot or Buster, which Dante doesn't have. And the moment you switch back to Nero, it makes you play Monopoly and do a boss rush. I hate Mission 19 so much, worst mission in the series. DmC Devil May Cry. Now, I know putting this above Devil May Cry 4 will be seen as sacrilege, but I hold these games in very similar regard. Both have great gameplay with an underwhelming story, but I think I prefer DmC slightly more because it has more variety with the levels and less obnoxious enemies. You just watched a whole video about it, and I don't want to repeat myself, but there is a few things I want to update. I was wrong about the guns, Charge Shot is great. The difficulty is a bit of a strange topic. I said the game was too easy, which I still think is true, but only for the 3 starting difficulties. After you beat the game, you unlock more difficulties, and they can be pretty tough, so if you want a challenge, the game can give it, but I think that first playthrough could have been a bit harder. Oh yeah, I got my hands on Definitive Edition too. It's good, basically a straight upgrade to the original. Play this version if you have access to, what? Oh right, there's a DLC. A few months after launch, they released Virgil's Downfall. I kinda ignored it in the main review, but basically after the events of DmC, Virgil gets very sleepy and has a nightmare. You play as Virgil, and he's got a pretty cool moveset, Doppelganger is really fun, and the cutscenes look awesome. Yeah, that's it. The levels are kinda boring, and the music is such a downgrade to the base game. The new enemies aren't anything special either. Overall it was okay. A step down from the main game, but still fun. Though now that I've played the rest of the series, I can see how DmC failed to deliver as a reboot. And I'm not just talking about the character changes, though that is a big problem. But it's missing a lot of mechanics from the other games, like style switching or taunting, and even Bloody Palace wasn't added until a month after launch. But if you can separate your expectations from the rest of the series, the core gameplay is still very fun, and the changes to the controls give it a pretty different feel to the rest. If you're a new fan like me, don't skip out on this one because it's definitely worth playing, and if you're a veteran who skipped out on it back in the day, I'd recommend giving it a shot. It's much easier to appreciate it for what it is rather than what it isn't now that fans got the sequel they wanted and the series isn't under threat of being replaced. DmC 5. This is the absolute peak of the combat system. Nero's arm mechanic is awesome, Dante's moveset is at its most complex, and V... I don't like V very much. The variety with weapons and arms makes the combo system extremely freeform and creative. It made coming up with routes extremely simple because I would always think, wouldn't it be cool if? And the game always said, yes. I wasn't too impressed by the writing, but it's definitely a step up from all the games below it. The actual story isn't great, but the occasional good character moment kept me interested. There is something I keep thinking about though. Nero is a pretty great character, I think most would agree on that, but if I were to describe him as simply as I could, I'd call him a hot-headed, cocky young dude who swears a lot. He kinda reminds me of someone. Looking back, these two are pretty similar, so why is it that Nero is one of my favorite characters in this series while I found Dante really boring? I think the answer is pretty simple. We see Nero lose. It's a lot more compelling to see Nero as a young person in over his head while Dante is just an asshole and gets away with it because he's good at what he does. We only ever see Dante vulnerable once, and it's in a scene with little weight because Cat doesn't die here or anything, while Nero is relatable because he experiences genuine loss throughout the story. Or maybe it's because he says less dumb shit, who cares? DmC 3. Honestly, I didn't know whether to put 5 or 3 at the top spot. The combat is definitely more limiting than future entries, and some enemies are horrible, but I don't really care. Because somehow this game about a wacky dude who fights demons and says one-liners managed to get me invested in its story. The family drama stuff was surprisingly compelling. It balances its character moments with its comedy and its batshit insane action sequences really well, in a way that never made me question when the game went from this to this. My only real complaints with the gameplay is the style system. You get 4 styles to switch between, and they level up the more you use them. I think they could have made the experience gain a little faster. I ended my first playthrough with Swordmaster at level 3 and Royal Guard at level 2. They hadn't invented style switching yet either, so you can only switch between them at Divinity statues. Because of this, I never used Trickster or Gunslinger because giving up Swordmaster's moves just felt like too big of a cost, and I only ever occasionally used Royal Guard for some bosses. I do wish it weren't limited to 2 weapons of each type though, but that's pretty minor. Also, good lord, this game is tough. I died an embarrassing amount to Cerberus. All in all, this game rules. This whole series rules. Each game has its own strengths and weaknesses, but they all bring something unique to the table, because at the end of the day, these games are awesome, and as long as you can have some fun playing them, who cares which one is the best? I get it's extremely hypocritical to say that after doing my personal ranking, but I really want to get across that my opinions aren't better than anyone else's just because I made a crappy video about them. So throw that ranking out the window, because what I say is no more valuable than anyone else's comments or forum posts are. Maybe DmC 4 is your favorite because you love the buster mechanic, and that's awesome. Maybe DmC 1 is your favorite because of the darker atmosphere, and that's rad. Maybe DmC 2 is your favorite, and you're wrong. But at the end of the day, this series is incredible, and I don't regret getting into it through the strangest entry in the franchise.